My name's Lila. I've always been the kind of person who prefers code to cocktails, a quiet evening over a raucous party. But life has a funny way of throwing you into the unexpected. That night at the party, hosted by a friend from college, was supposed to be another routine social gathering. I was already planning my escape route to my cozy apartment and my awaiting laptop when he walked in. David was hard to miss. At 22, he had the kind of energy that filled up a room. With his athlete's build and an easy smile, he was surrounded by admirers the moment he stepped through the door. I tried to keep to my corner, nursing my drink and fiddling with my phone, but fate had other plans. "Hey, you're Lila, right?" His voice cut through the noise, pulling me back from my digital refuge. I looked up to find those intense eyes fixed on me. "Yeah, that's me. And you are?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "David Matthews, the rising hockey star everyone seemed to talk about." "David, I've heard a lot about you. You're the genius programmer at Turner Tech, right?" His grin was infectious, and I found myself smiling, despite my initial resolve to remain disinterested. "Genius might be stretching it, but yeah, I work for an IT company," I said, trying to play it cool. David chuckled, pulling up a chair next to me, uninvited but not unwelcome. "So, what brings you to a party where you clearly wish you were anywhere else?" I shrugged, looking around at the bustling room. "Guess I was trying to be social. My friends keep telling me I need to get out more." "That's funny." David leaned in, his voice dropping to a playful whisper. "Because I've been trying to get out of these things too. Too much fake chatter." "You want to escape? Let's grab some real food, this party stuff is just fluff." I hesitated. This wasn't my usual style, but there was something about David that felt different, genuine. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he really saw me, not just the quiet girl in the corner. As we sneaked out of the party, the cool night air felt like a splash of clarity. We ended up at a 24-hour diner, the kind with greasy fries and endless coffee. David ordered the biggest burger on the menu for us to split, and I found myself sharing stories about coding mishaps and server crashes. David listened, really listened, nodding and asking questions that showed he got it, even if he didn't know a router from a modem. It was refreshing, talking to someone who didn't glaze over when I geeked out about technology. As the night turned into early morning, I realized that David wasn't just a hotshot athlete, he was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth. Maybe that's why when he suggested we do this again next Friday, I didn't think twice before saying yes. David and I had been the talk of our circle since he started courting me. Despite our age difference, with me being 32 and him only 22, there was something electric between us. Honestly, it was flattering to have someone so vibrant and full of promise by my side. The day David decided to introduce me to his mom, Susan, I was nervous. The moment we arrived, the look on her face said it all. It was like she had tasted something sour just seeing me. "So, you're Lila," Susan began, sizing me up as if I were an item at an auction. "David has told me very little about you, which I suppose isn't surprising." I tried to smile, extending my hand. "It's nice to meet you, Susan." She barely touched my hand before pulling back. "Let's sit down. We have a lot to discuss, apparently." As we sat in her meticulously decorated living room, the air thick with tension, Susan didn't waste any time. "David tells me you two are planning to marry. He's a professional athlete, on his way to becoming a star. And you, Lila, you're a programmer, correct? And quite a bit older than him." "Yes, I am a programmer," I replied, keeping my voice steady, despite her tone. "And yes, there's an age difference, but we love each other." Susan scoffed. "Love," she muttered under her breath. "David, she's 32. You're just 22. You should be thinking about your career, not settling down with someone who—" "Mom," David interrupted, his voice firm. "I love Lila. That's what matters to me. We're getting married." Susan's eyes narrowed. "You're blinded by infatuation. Think about your future, your contracts, your endorsements." This is a mistake. I felt a surge of defiance. I'm not here to argue, Susan. I came because David wanted us to meet. I respect your concern, but our decision to marry is ours to make. David nodded, squeezing my hand under the table. Exactly. We've talked this through, and we're serious. Lila's age, her job, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is how we feel about each other. Susan leaned back, her expression unreadable for a moment before she spoke again. Well, it seems I can't convince my own son to think clearly. If you're going to be part of this family, Lila, I expect you to understand the pressures David will face. Can you handle that? Without dragging him down? Her words stung, but I held my gaze. I'm not here to drag anyone down, Susan. I support David fully, in his career and everything else. There was a pause, a heavy, uncomfortable silence, before Susan stood up abruptly. I need to think about this. David, you're welcome to stay for dinner. Lila, I think it's best if you leave now. David started to protest, but I stopped him. It's okay, David. Let's not make this harder. I'll go, but think about what I said, Susan. I'm not the enemy here. When I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon with joy. David was thrilled too when I told him, and he immediately suggested we speed up our wedding plans. Let's not wait, Lila. Let's get married as soon as we can, he said, his eyes shining with excitement and a bit of urgency. The joy of our news, however, didn't quite extend to everyone. When David broke the news to his mom, Susan, her reaction was less than enthusiastic. You're what? Pregnant? This changes things, she muttered, clearly agitated by the unexpected twist. David tried to calm her down. Mom, this is good news. We're happy. Susan paced the room, her brows furrowed in thought before she turned to face us with a stern look. Fine, but if you're going to do this, you're doing it on my terms. First, you two are signing a prenup. A prenup? I echoed, my stomach sinking. Yes, to ensure my son's future earnings in hockey are protected. He's going to be making millions, and we can't have any risks, Susan explained, her voice firm and non-negotiable. David looked at me, his expression apologetic. Lila, I know it's not ideal, but my mom has a point about protecting the career I'm building. It's just a formality. I nodded slowly, the reality of our situation settling in. Okay, what's the second condition? I asked, bracing myself. You need to show your commitment to this family, Lila. I want you to handle the initial mortgage payment for your new house, 50% up front. Susan's eyes were locked on mine, challenging me. I was stunned. 50%? That's a lot of money, Susan. David was quick to jump in. Mom, that's too much. Lila, we can figure something out. But I knew what I had to do. I called my dad later that day, explaining the situation and how much I needed. Without a moment's hesitation, he agreed. I'll help you, Lila. It's important you start your married life on stable ground, he said, transferring $200,000 to my account. With the financial and prenuptial conditions met, we moved forward with the wedding plans. The day arrived faster than I had anticipated, filled with a mix of emotions. Our wedding was beautiful, set in a quaint little chapel with flowers everywhere, and our closest friends and family gathered. I walked down the aisle, my heart full of love for David and our future together. My parents looked so proud and happy, their smiles beaming across the room. But there, off to the side, stood Susan with a look that could only be described as sour. Throughout the evening, her displeasure was evident. She wore a tight smile as guests congratulated her, her eyes often darting towards me with undisguised disapproval. Despite her attitude, David and I tried to focus on the positive. We mingled with guests, laughed, danced, and celebrated our union and the little life growing inside me. After the wedding, it didn't take long for life to take a sharp turn into the unexpected. Susan declared she'd be moving in with us, supposedly to help me through the early stages of pregnancy. I wasn't keen on the idea, but to avoid any drama, I reluctantly agreed. Little did I know, This decision would soon transform my home into a battleground where peace was a rare commodity. Within weeks of moving in, Susan had taken over the house. It was subtle at first, a few items moved here and there, some new decorations. But soon, her presence and influence grew stronger, more invasive. She didn't do much in terms of actual housework or helping me. Instead, she spent her days shopping with the money David made from his hockey career, filling our already cozy home with lavish furniture and expensive clothes that reflected her taste, not ours. One afternoon, as I was trying to rearrange some of these new additions to make space for my own things, Susan walked in, her eyes scanning the room critically. "Lila, what are you doing? You're just moving things around without improving anything. You should focus more on resting and less on these useless activities," she snapped, her tone harsh and condescending. I bit my tongue, holding back my frustration. "I'm just trying to make some space, Susan. It's getting a bit crowded in here." "Crowded? This is quality, Lila. These are things a proper home should have. You should be thankful," she retorted, waving a dismissive hand at my simpler decorations. Feeling the sting of her words, I tried to keep my cool. "Susan, I appreciate your help around the house, but maybe we could tone down the shopping a bit. There's hardly space to move." Susan's eyes narrowed, her voice cold. "I'm only trying to bring some standard to this place. If you can't see that, it's not my problem. You should focus on what's important, like taking care of David." The remark hit harder than expected, and I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. This wasn't the home I had envisioned for us, filled with love and mutual respect, but rather, it was turning into a showcase of Susan's tastes and preferences. Later that evening, when David got home from practice, I decided it was time to discuss the living situation. "David, we need to talk about your mom," I started, my voice steady but filled with concern. "What about her?" He looked tired, rubbing the back of his neck as he sat down. "She's taking over the house, David. And she's constantly criticizing me, making me feel like I'm not doing enough around here," I explained, hoping he'd understand. David's face hardened, and he sighed deeply. "Lila, she's just trying to help. You know how she is. She wants everything to be perfect. You should try to get along, show her some respect." As the days turned into weeks, Susan's dominance in our home grew. My attempts to reclaim some sense of normalcy or to assert my preferences were met with cold resistance from Susan and frustrating neutrality from David. The more I tried to adapt, the more isolated I felt within my own walls. It was a routine morning, and I was at the clinic for a regular pregnancy checkup, expecting nothing but good news. But the doctor's face told a different story as he reviewed the ultrasound images. "Lila, it seems there's a significant developmental issue with the fetus. I recommend further tests, but you need to be prepared for all possible outcomes, including the possibility of not carrying to term." The drive home was a blur, and walking into the house, I was met by Susan's scrutinizing gaze. "Well, what did the doctor say?" she demanded, her tone more intrusive than concerned. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "It's not great news, Susan. There are complications. The baby might not make it." Susan's reaction was cold, almost mechanical. "I see. Well, you need to think about what's best, for you and for David. Sometimes these things are for the best." Her words stung, but I had no energy to argue. I needed David, his support more than ever. When he finally came home, I told him everything, the tears I had held back now freely streaming down my face. David looked devastated, but his words were hollow. "I'm so sorry, Lila. We'll get through this. Whatever you need, I'm here." But as the days went on, David's promise felt empty. He seemed distant, retreating into his own world, leaving me to cope with my grief and fear alone. Meanwhile, Susan's true colors came out more vividly than ever. One evening, as I sat in the living room, trying to find some distraction in a book, Susan sat across from me, her eyes sharp. "Lila, you need to think about the future. If this pregnancy isn't going to work out, maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time you and David reconsidered your situation. A childless marriage is bound to fail. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Anger boiled inside me, but before I could respond, David walked in. I looked to him for support, but instead of defending me, he stayed silent. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the day came when the complications of my pregnancy could no longer be managed. The doctors did what they could, but the decision was inevitable. The pregnancy had to be terminated. As I lay in the hospital bed, coming to terms with the loss, the doctor explained the gravity of my condition. "It's going to be difficult for you to get pregnant again," he said with a somber look. Returning home was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was drained, not just physically, but emotionally. My heart ached in a way that words couldn't describe. I walked through the door in tears, a mess of grief and broken dreams, hoping, praying for some semblance of comfort from the people who were supposed to be my family. What I walked into was anything but comforting. Susan wasted no time. As soon as she saw my state, her words sliced through the air, cold and sharp. "Well, look at you. I told you, didn't I? You just aren't cut out for this. You can't even manage to have a healthy child." Her cruel words hit me like physical blows. I stood there, stunned into silence, my tears falling faster. I looked to David, desperate for him to say something, anything in my defense. But David was distant, his eyes avoiding mine. He shifted uncomfortably, then said, "Look, Lila, I have important matches coming up. I can't have all this drama around. It's just too much." I stared at him, disbelief clouding my pain. Our child was not just some drama, David. This was our baby, our future. How can you be so cold? David's face hardened. "I'm tired, Lila. Tired of your complaints and all these problems. I've got a career, and honestly, I've got plenty of options." He paused, his voice dropping as he added, "Maybe it's better if we just end this. I need someone who fits into my life, not complicates it." Susan clapped her hands, a twisted smile on her face. "Finally, some sense from you, David. Lila, you heard him. Pack your things. It's time for you to leave." David didn't help me with my bags, he didn't even say goodbye. As I closed the door behind me, the finality of that click echoed in my heart. When I arrived at my parents' house, my tears hadn't stopped. Seeing me in such a state, Dad was furious. "What happened, Lila? Tell me everything," he demanded, his voice a mix of concern and anger. Through sobs, I recounted everything, how Susan and David had treated me, the cruel words, the demand that I leave the house we shared. Dad's face turned red with each detail I shared, his fists clenching at his sides. "This is not going to stand, Lila. We're going to make sure you get what you deserve," he said, pulling out his phone to make a call. Within hours, he had lined up meetings with some of the best lawyers in the city. The next few days were a whirlwind. We met with a sharp and determined lawyer named Helen, who was appalled by my story. "We'll file for divorce immediately and sue for half of every investment you made in that house," she declared, her tone fierce and resolute. True to her word, Helen moved quickly. The divorce papers were served to David, and the lawsuit for my share of the house investments was filed. David and Susan were shocked. As the legal battle ensued, it became clear that they were in a precarious financial situation because of my mother-in-law's ill-considered spending. David and Susan were forced to sell the house. Meanwhile, David's life seemed to spiral. He met a young fan, a girl who was smitten with the shining star, and married her hastily. I heard about the wedding through friends. It didn't sting as much as I thought it would, instead, it felt like confirmation that leaving him was the right decision. But Susan couldn't resist one last jab. A few weeks after David's rushed wedding, I received a letter from her. Inside was a photo from the wedding, showing Susan beaming next to David and his new wife. On the back, Susan had written a note. "Finally, my son has found a young and healthy woman who will give birth to healthy children for him." The cruelty of her words was meant to wound, and it did, but not as deeply as she intended. The lawsuit dragged on, but eventually, the court ruled in my favor. I was awarded half of the investment we had made in our former home, a sum that significantly strained David's finances further. 2 years have rolled by since I last walked out of that house, feeling broken and betrayed. A lot has changed since then, especially for me and my dad's company. We've been breaking into the international market, and my work paid off in a big way. I received an international award in IT technology, a recognition that came with a prize of $1 million. Just when I thought things were settling down, my phone rang. The screen flashed a number I didn't recognize at first, but the voice that greeted me was unmistakably Susan's. "Lila, you need to come back to David," she stated bluntly. "No hellos, no how have you been?" I paused, taken aback. "Susan? Why would you think I'd come back?" Her voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. "David's been injured, a bad accident during a match. He's in a wheelchair now, can't play anymore. His wife left him, took half of everything. We need you." Her words were a jolt, but not enough to shake the foundation I'd rebuilt. "And you think I should return because of his injury? Why, Susan? Just because I have money now?" She didn't hesitate. "You're rich now, Lila. You can afford to take care of him. And me. I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. I'll even cook for you and let you have children, imagine that." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Susan, do you hear yourself? You want me back as some sort of nursemaid to David and his financial backer to you, just because I won money? It's always about money with you." Susan's voice cracked, angry and sharp. "You owe us, after everything." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see. "I owe you nothing, Susan. I built my life again from scratch, without any help from you or David. You threw me out when I was at my lowest. Why would I ever think of coming back?" There was a silence on the other end, heavy and thick. Then Susan spat out, "You're making a huge mistake, Lila." "I made my mistakes, Susan, but I learned from them. And returning to a life that nearly broke me isn't a mistake I'll make twice," I replied, my voice calm and steady. Hanging up the phone, I felt a surge of freedom. Her words no longer had the power to hurt me. I was truly free, and my life was my own. Looking around my office, filled with awards and the buzzing of computers, I knew I was right where I was meant to be. Later, at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony, looking out over the city lights. The challenges of the past seemed like distant memories, and the future was bright and full of promise. I had found success and contentment in my work, and I was surrounded by people who valued and respected me. As I sipped my wine, I thought about Susan's call, her voice so filled with anger and desperation. It was clear that in her world, money still dictated worth. But in my world, I measured wealth not by dollars in the bank, but by the happiness and peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. One crisp morning, as I walked into the office, the buzz of the upcoming product launch was palpable. My team, a group of brilliant and driven individuals, greeted me with enthusiastic updates. "Lila, we're almost ready to roll out the new software. Just a few tweaks left," Jenna, one of our lead developers, informed me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "That's great to hear, Jenna. Make sure those tweaks are solid. We can't afford slips, not with so much riding on this," I replied, my tone both encouraging and firm. Jenna nodded, her demeanor serious. "Absolutely, Lila. We're on it." I received a call from Dad later. His voice was brimming with pride. "Lila, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. Not just for your success at the company, but for how you've handled everything life threw at you." "Thanks, Dad. It means a lot to hear that from you. I couldn't have done it without your support," I responded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You did the heavy lifting, kiddo. I was just here to offer a hand when you needed it," he said, and we both laughed. That evening, as I walked through the park on my way home, I felt a deep sense of peace. I stopped for a moment, taking in the beauty of the setting sun, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was moments like this that I had once thought were lost to me forever. But here I was, standing strong, the master of my fate once more. I had faced betrayal and loss, fought back against those who sought to bring me down, and emerged not just unscathed but stronger. As I resumed my walk, a plan began to form in my mind. I wanted to use my experiences to help others who might be facing their own battles. Perhaps a foundation, something that could offer support and strength to those in need.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.